We read last week from Sri Aurobindo's writings, The Chariot of Jagannath, or the idea of an ideal society. And Sri Aurobindo reveals to us that this idea has been there in the human race. In fact, right from the time of creation, creation is not just meant for individual perfection, but also for a collective perfection of this earth, of the terrestrial consciousness, of which man at present is the spearhead. At present. So, this idea has time to time asserted itself in the mind of the race, and there have been several examples. In fact, Sri Aurobindo speaks of some of these examples. For instance, in Christianity, we have the idea of the kingdom of God being brought down to earth. We have the similar idea in Islam, where there is this idea of the one God who rules over the entire world. In Hinduism, the idea of Ram Rajya, an ideal society governed by an ideal ethic and an ideal law of divine living. There is a very interesting symbolic story in Indian thought about this, and the story is the marriage of Shiva. So when Shiva goes to marry Parvati, it's very interesting, as we have seen, Sati is the old creation, and when that is destroyed, new creation must come up. And all the gods pray to Shiva that please, if you cut yourself off from Shakti, it will be a disaster for creation itself. All the asuras reign over it. And as the story goes, to cut a rather long story short, though the story is replete with very symbolic images throughout, that Shiva goes to marry Parvati, and who is in his Bharat, as they say, the marriage party. The marriage party is full of not only the gods, there are demons, there are ghosts, elves, and all kinds of creatures. So much so that, as the myth goes, Parvati wonders, or rather the people who are around Parvati, they wonder what kind of a bridegroom he is, what kind of a company he keeps. And yet, Parvati accepts the burden lovingly and willingly, because out of this very material, she has to forge a divine unity and a divine harmony. It's a very difficult task. We know that the mother has undertaken this task amidst all of us. So the story is very symbolic. Sri Aurobindo speaks of a similar effort which was tried by the Khalsas, the Sikh religion. Sri Aurobindo says that it was one of the first efforts to create a spiritualized society. And yet, because the mind of the race is not ready, it degrades itself. Even for an individual to rise up to the higher levels is so difficult. How much more difficult would it be for the whole mass of humanity, or at least a group of humanity, to rise up? In this very story of the Khalsa, which Sri Aurobindo says was the effort, one of the first solid efforts to create a spiritualized society on a spiritual foundation. There is a story of Guru Nanak, who started the whole movement, and it's a very instructive story that Guru Nanak went far and wide, as far as Tibet and China, and he went towards the west as far as Persia. And those days when there was hardly any means of travel, and he went as far as the northeast of the country and down south. And then he came back, and naturally a number of people gathered around him, and they all had Guru Nanak as their master. They were following whatever they could. So the story goes that one of the yogis who was living nearby, I don't recollect his name, probably it was Lehna or anyways. So this yogi was attracted, he was very impressed by the following of Guru Nanak. So he tells him that, sir, you really have a very good number of followers. It really is so wonderful. I am very happy and impressed to see this. So Guru Nanak says, you don't know the truth. What is the truth? He says, come with me, I'll show you the truth. This is after some time of their stay. So Guru Nanak at night assumes the form of a very fierce person, uncouth, and his whole face was looking fierce, and he walks out. Now the news spreads among the disciples that Guru Nanak is going out, so a lot of disciples come out to walk with him. But when they see his fierce mood, they are scared. And many of them fall back, that we don't know what a mission is going on. We are fine in the safety of our homes. Some go ahead, and some of them find, as the story goes, some silver coins, and they come back. That we have followed him enough, and this is the reward he has given for following him. And we are happy, hail him, and thanks to his grace and kindness, and they come back. Still a few go, and they are satisfied with some gold coins. At the end, as they take to a more and more difficult path, only one man remains, the one who asked Guru Nanak the question that you have many followers. Interestingly, he was not a follower of Guru Nanak. And when Guru Nanak leaves his body, it is to him that he entrusts the charge of the next to carry on the movement. He is known in the Sikh history as Guru Angad Dev. Very few people know that Angad Dev was not even a follower when the whole movement had started. It's later on that he followed the path. So it's so difficult to carry on a collective evolution, because Sri Aurobindo reveals that even a great idea, when the collectivity is not ready and it grasps it, it holds it very imperfectly and expresses it very imperfectly. One example that Sri Aurobindo gives is, in one of his Bangla writings, is about the French Revolution. He says there was such a beautiful idea of liberty, equality and fraternity, which is a very sattvic idea. It's a very sattvic impulse to have freedom, equality and fraternity. What greater ideal could humanity think of? And he says because it was seized by the Rajasic mind and the Rajasic heart, therefore the movement collapsed and the nation as a whole fell into tamas. Again it rose by the strength of Rajas, and again it fell, because this ideal cannot be established so long as man's heart is not purified of the dross of Rajas. Immediately this whole thing will be turned into its inverted image. Again, in India we have, Sri Aurobindo again gives this example, that how the Indian mind caught hold of some sattvic ideas, but in a state of utter tamas. And it turned it into a total disaster. Thus the idea of surrender to God, which is one of the cornerstones of inner life, without which the first step on inner life is actually impossible, whatever effort we may put in. And yet when a tamasic mind seizes it, it immediately confuses it for an inert life. So inert life becomes an inner life, because one has surrendered to God. So one has to do nothing and God will do everything. So this is how the tamas holds a great idea and turns it into its very opposite. An idea which becomes the cause of so much ruin and disaster. That is how Arjuna catches this idea. He says, why should I struggle? Why should I strive? Even in Savitri we have this beautiful, that the conflict within Savitri's heart. She says, why not I pact ties with my fate? After all, God is there in all things, and I know how to walk my husband's feet. If he goes to death, I know how to follow him in the wake of death and follow his footsteps into the domain of death. Why should I strive and struggle to bring a greater law upon earth? Why should I try to change the law? And then she hears a voice that not for thyself thou strivest, but for man, for God. This is the whole truth of surrender, that it's a surrender of egoism, it's not a surrender of action, it's a surrender of desire-driven action and replaced by divine-driven or divine-impelled action. So this is the whole problem, that even when a great idea is born upon earth, the society, the human mass seizes it very, very imperfectly, and in its application it completely fails. Therefore, the social evolution has to go through many stages. Sri Aurobindo says these are two sides of his work. In fact, even a Buddhist philosophy which stresses on individual nirvana, yet speaks of Sangha. Sri Aurobindo speaks about it. He says because it believes that if there is an ideal grouping which would facilitate an individual discovery of that truth which it is seeking, then it would be so much beautiful. And the mother speaks of a propitious space for the flowering of the children of God. So this collective evolution and an individual evolution both go together and both complement each other. But since mankind is not yet ready, as Sri Aurobindo says, that nobody knows what is the chariot of Jagannath. No Shilpi on earth, no artist on earth knows how to build it. Why an artist, even if he conceives, the material is not ready. We have this vision of Swami Vivekananda, which is usually half reported and therefore misunderstood. The half vision which Swami Vivekananda sees, it's very interesting that Sri Aurobindo sees the other half of the vision. The first half is that Swami Vivekananda goes into the mountains and he is distressed by the plight of India and its suffering. In great tamas, India is lying, and he sees a vision where he sees Mother Bharati chained in rags, tattered clothes. So he is seized by a great impulse that, oh mother, if I could free you of these bonds. Instantly, she changes form and she manifests in a golden form. And she tells him, you think you can free me? If I want, I can free myself. So this is the first half of the vision, and it is the one which is reported. This is the second half of the vision. And carrying this vision further, Sri Aurobindo speaks in Bhavani Bharati. He writes, we have to erect a temple for the mother, so she can free herself. But that's where Sri Aurobindo brings in that aspect of human labor, that there is needed the instruments, those who can become, as he says, the wheel in the chariot or the nail which doesn't come out. We know that if a vehicle moves at a great speed, what would happen? Sometimes the screw, even one single screw, if it comes out of a scooter or a tire, it can lead to a crash, and the passenger who is sitting can die. So how important even a small little nut is. It has to be strong to bear the impact. So the whole collectivity can evolve as the human instruments become ready. And to make it ready, divine uses many methods. Sri Aurobindo reveals that one of the methods he uses, when there is a great tamas, he sends rajas. So last week we were talking about how we see a great amount of rajas not only across the world but also in India. Sri Aurobindo 100 years back says it is necessary. God is sending it. He says if rajas is not there, a nation which is devoid of rajasic energy very soon sinks into tamas. And the worst is it mistakes tamas for sattva. In fact, he challenges this assertion that India fell because of sattva. He says it's not because of sattva. It's not because of excess of sattva. It fell because of tamas. And tamas leads to ruin. So he is sending a wave of rajas. In one of his very interesting speeches, it's very interesting when we read about how Sri Aurobindo was moving around, giving talks. One can imagine what would be happening to people to hear Sri Aurobindo speak. And Nalini Da has described it so beautifully that he would keep awake till late night because a lot of people knew him that he is an accomplished yogi. This is before coming to Pondicherry. And they would come to him asking for their problems, to solve it, for guidance in life. And Sri Aurobindo will give time. He says till almost late night, almost till the morning would start, the lamp would be burning and Sri Aurobindo would be there. And then again morning he would start on the work. So this is I think, Jhalakati speech. Yes, this is Jhalakati speech. If I am not mistaken, this is in what is now Bangladesh, and or on the borders of Bangladesh and West Bengal. And the context of the speech is that a great leader at that time, Ashwini Kumar Datta, has died. And all the people feel that, my God, what has happened? The whole movement is going to collapse. because thanks to the repressive policies of the government, and there was one leader who could stand by, and he's gone. So they are in a state of shell shock, as they say in the parlance of military, and Sri Aurobindo comes and rouses them. And what does he say? What does he remind? He says that yes, the storm has come. Storm has swept over us today. I saw it come. I saw the striding of the storm blast and the rush of the rain. And as I saw it, an idea came to me. This is how the divine looks at life. When we look at storm, we just huddle and bundle ourselves and sit down. Some of us may have faced a storm. I have faced one on the banks of Yamuna in Agra, and it's terrible. And all of us just held together and ducked low because, for those few hours, the fury is unimaginable. So, but how does the divine see a storm? So he says, I saw it and an idea seized upon me. What is this storm that is so mighty and sweeps with such fury upon us? And I said to my heart, it is God who rides abroad on the wings of the hurricane. In one of his aphorism, he says, who is Napoleon? People say that he was Titan, he was this, he was that. But I saw the arm of God striding across Europe. So here he says, when I looked at the storm, I saw God riding on it. It is the might and force of the Lord that manifested itself, and his almighty hands that seized and shook the roof so violently over our heads today. So it is the living image of Kali. He sees rushing, and whatever little shelter we had, he takes away. Why? Because he has to build a new shelter. That too was the manifestation of the Almighty. That's how Sri Aurobindo becomes ready to see that great vision which the Gita speaks of, the integral vision of the divine, Vasudevam Sarvamiti. One cannot see Vasudevam Sarvamiti so long as one cuts off one part of creation completely. So here is this aspect of creation. That too was the manifestation of the Almighty. We were building an edifice to be the temple of our mother's worship. This is what Sri Aurobindo speaks of in Bhavani Bharati. He says we were building a temple. We were rearing her a new and fair mansion, a palace fit for her dwelling. It was then that he came down upon us. He flung himself upon the building we had raised. He shook the roof with his mighty hands, and part of the building was displaced and ruined. Why has he done that? So he is raising this question whenever we meet individual storms, or whenever we face collective storms. We think, what has come? What is happening? We are bewildered. But he who can remain calm and sees with the calm of the spirit, he alone sees. As the Upanishads say, Yam pashyati sa pashyati. He who can remain dheer in the face of the storm, he only can see. Why has he done this? We are iron upon his anvil, and the blows are showering upon us, not to destroy but to recreate. This also we read last time, that Kali's destructions are a grace, because it's the swiftest path to the divine. So he's saying, God has chosen to hammer, the iron is not ready, the foundation is not deep enough. So he is throwing himself as hammer upon the anvil. Without suffering, there can be no strength. Without sacrifice, there can be no growth. And then he speaks that it is not in vain that Ashwini Kumar has been taken from his people. So people believe that after his departure, all this entire freedom movement will collapse. Can we imagine? Most of us have not even heard his name. And there was a point of time when people believed that if this one man is not there, the whole movement is going to collapse. And Sri Aurobindo comes and reminds, Ashwini Kumar has been taken away. It is not in vain that all Maharashtra mourns for Tilak at Mandalay. Tilak has also been taken away. And then Sri Aurobindo reminds, it is he, not any other, who has taken them, and his ways are not the ways of men. Who could speak like this except one with a leonine strength? We can imagine Sri Aurobindo speaking this at what age? Mid-30s. And he is saying, great men like Tilak and such beings have been taken away. There is wide repression. Nobody can speak a word against the government. And he says at that point of time that you think it is they who are carrying the movement? It is the divine. And he says it is he who has taken them away. But he is all wise. He knows better than we do what is needful for us. He has taken Ashwini Kumar away from Barisal. Is the movement dead? Is Swadeshi dead? And then he says something very interesting. Ashwini is not the leader of this movement. Tilak is not the leader. God is the leader. This is what he is reminding all of us all the time. That it is he who is carrying us in his Noah's Ark, in his great boat, the mother's supramental ship towards the great divine destiny. They do not know that the storm that has been sweeping over the country was not sent by them, but by him for his own great purposes. So he is saying that the British government doesn't know. They believe we have succeeded by repressing. So he says they do not know. They think they have sent the storm. They only become instruments of God's design. And the same strength that was manifested in the storm today and in the storm of calamity that has passed over the country, the same strength is in us. That's the beauty of God's ways. That after we have faced the purificatory ritual, the fire of purification, again we have the story of Sita, that when she comes back from Ravana, she has been in the grip of the Rakshasa for a long time. She is earth nature. So straight away she is not ready for union with the divine, the Lord. She must pass through the purificatory ritual. In that purificatory ritual, much that is dross, which is holding on to the ego, which is still moved by desire, will be destroyed. Fire has the quality to burn it away. But what will remain will become not only pure, but strong. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is reminding us, that after the storm has passed, after the calamity has gone away, what remains? That strength of the storm is embodied in the individuals who have faced it. Those who are taken from us must, after all, someday pass away. What is the use of human instrument? We always trust human beings and human instrument, that this instrument or that instrument. They had to pass away. We are strong in their strength. They enrich the earth with their strength. They enrich the earth with their sweetness. They enrich the earth with their peace. They enrich the earth with their faith. And all that passes on to men who would follow. There is this beautiful poem, I think it's by Whitman. I forget the lines, but it's very, very powerful. He says, "O young men, pass over us. You are stronger and wiser and nobler." So here he is saying that their strength is with us. He has taken them away from us for a little, in order that in their absence we might feel that it was not really in their strength that we were strong, in their inspiration that we worked, but that a higher force was working in them, and when they are removed, can still work in the hearts of the people. When they pass away, others will arise. Or even if no great men stand forth to lead, still the soul of this people will be great with the force of God within and do the work. This it is that he seeks to teach us by these separations, by these calamities. So this is the message of the storm. We read the other day about the time spirit embodied in Kali, that as she passes over the nations, over groups of humanity, we think it is this individual or that individual. None is necessary. Even if there is not a single person. I remember somewhere that I think, of course, there is an aphorism of Sri Aurobindo which we remember, and there is something which Nalini has said, that even if there is one single person who has faith in the work and in the mission, it will be done. He says, in fact, a cause is not lost so long as there is single person who has faith in its fulfillment. So all that is required is one person to have faith that so will it be, and the divine never abandons. na pranashyati. So what we should do? He says, we have only to be strong and enduring. In the agenda, towards the end, Mother says, my child, you have to learn to endure, 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 endure. Repeatedly she emphasizes. Because there is a difficult passage. This evolution is not an easy evolution. And one has to learn to endure, but keeping the faith and the aspiration steadfast. That is the only virtue that is needed. We shall never lose our fortitude, our courage, our endurance. In another place in aphorism, Sri Aurobindo says there are two virtues which are indispensable, which would save mankind even if all the rest are lost. Very interestingly, he doesn't say intellectual capacity, thank God. He says courage and love are the only indispensable virtues. Even if all the rest are lost, these two can rescue mankind. So here he is teaching us the lesson of courage and of course the love. The whole thing is about the love of the divine of Bhavani Bharati. And what we should do, it is by looking the storm in the face and meeting it with a high courage. Fortitude and endurance that the nation can be saved. It is that which the mother demands from us. So it is not just a tamasic kind of life where one avoids conflicts. It is not a sattvic kind of life which is afraid of conflicts, but a rajo sattva guna, which Sri Aurobindo speaks of in early writings, in Bangla writings, when he goes to prison. He says, which is the best ground for divine to manifest? He says, among these persons, he sees the prisoners who in the face of danger, where they may lose their life, yet can laugh, yet they are detached from the sense of the body that what will happen to me tomorrow. We are so much worried and so much full of fear. And look at these men. He says it was a lesson. And he says these are the kind of men of whom Christ has said that they will inherit the kingdom of heaven. So this is the kind of humanity Sri Aurobindo is preparing us for. This is what God demands from us. He sent the storm yesterday and it carried the roof away. He sent it today with greater violence and it seized the roof to remove it. But today the roof remained. This is what he demands of us. I have sent my storms upon you so that you may feel and train your strength. If you have suffered by them, if something has been broken, it does not matter. So long as you learn the lesson that it is for strength I make you suffer and always for strength, then remember this. Brave its fury. Feel your strength. Train your strength in the struggle with the violence of the wind. And by that strength, hold down the roof over the temple of the mother. So this is the message. And let's end with this beautiful line where Sri Aurobindo, after describing this, this is from the Bangla writings now I am reading. This was from Karma Yogin, the Jhalakati speech, where Sri Aurobindo describes looking at the prisoners and he says, this is the most fertile soil. And he speaks of them that I went to a place, in one of his aphorisms, I went to a place full of holy men and was bored in their company. And I went to a place where people who were criminals and those who have offended were kept. And I found God there. God took me to a prison and I found God there. And how did he find God? We know the great vision, of course, which he speaks of in the Uttarpara speech. And then he speaks of these young men in the prison. And he says, this unperturbed disposition is impossible for one used to evil actions. There was not the slightest trace in them of cruelty, habitual evil doing, or crookedness. Crookedness takes away the natural joy and peace inside. They are face to face with death, and yet they are not trying to be crooked. They are not scheming how we can escape it. Let's find a way. Can we bribe the lawyer? Can we find the policeman on our side? Can we get contacts who would free us? They are not scared. Why? Because they are living in that consciousness. Laughter, conversation or play, all was joyful, sinless, full of love. Sri Aurobindo is not describing an ashram. Or rather we can say this was the first prototype of the ashram that he has experienced. The result of this freedom of the mind began to show itself soon. This freedom of the mind over circumstances. They are going to face death, and yet they are free inside. They may be deported, and yet they are free inside. The perfect fruit can be obtained only if the spiritual seed is sown in this kind of field. Sri Aurobindo speaks of in Savitri, this was a seed cast in endless time. Thus, from the transcendent leaped out the worlds. A word is spoken or a light is shown. A moment sees the ages toil to express. All he had done was to prepare a field. So Sri Aurobindo has prepared the field, and if we look at many of the rules and regulations of the ashram life, they are to create a rajas under the sattva and turn towards spiritual light. Much of it is basically that not unbridled rajas work, which is rajas, but under the governance of sattva, selfless, disinterested, as an offering to the divine, and turn towards the high truth is the best preparation for spiritual life, for a collective evolution. And then he speaks of that, looking at some of these boys, Jesus said to the disciples, those who are like these boys will attain the kingdom of God. And then towards the end, he reminds us, it's something very beautiful which gives the great hope of the future. And if I remember rightly, when Mother was asked that, Mother, we love you so much, and what will happen about the coming time? She said, my child, you do not know. The ages that are going to come, the children who are going to come, will love me much more. And here we have something again along similar lines. Ramakrishna Paramahansa once said, what you are seeing now is really nothing. Just about 100 years back, he said to his disciples, what you are seeing now is really nothing. Such a flood of spirituality is coming into this land that even boys will attain realization after 3 days sadhana. To see these boys was to have no doubt about the truth of this prophecy. This sattvic temperament is indeed the hope of the country. The ease with which brotherliness, self-knowledge and love of God possess the Indian mind and express themselves in action is not possible in the case of anyone else. What is necessary is the renunciation of tamas, the control of rajas, and the manifestation of sattva. This is what is being prepared in accordance with God's secret purpose. So this is the preparation which is going on through the storm and through the silence.